The dust swirled in the golden afternoon light as Beatrice Ashford clutched the wrinkled letter in her trembling hands, squinting at the weathered sign that marked the edge of the property. This couldn't be right. According to her brother's correspondence, she should be arriving at the affluent Harrington estate, not this dilapidated ranch with its sagging porch and faded paint. The journey from Boston to Kuster, Montana territory had been long and arduous, and now, standing before what was clearly the wrong destination, Beatrice felt tears of frustration threatening to spill. "Madam, can I help you with something?" The deep voice startled her, causing her to whirl around, her burgundy traveling dress spinning with her movement. A tall man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. His shoulders were broad, filling out a worn cotton shirt that had seen better days, much like everything else on this property. I believe I'm lost," Beatrice admitted, her Boston accent marking her immediately as an outsider. "I'm looking for the Harrington estate. My brother arranged for me to serve as governess there." The man approached, and as he drew closer, Beatrice could see that his eyes were a striking shade of green, bright against his sun-bronzed skin. He removed his hat, revealing tousled golden-brown hair. "The Harrington place," he shook his head slowly. "That's about 15 miles east of here. And I'm afraid you've missed them by about 2 weeks. Family packed up and headed to San Francisco after old man Harrington struck it rich in some mining venture." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. "Left? But that's impossible. My brother wrote that they were expecting me." "Mails slow out here," he said simply. "Things change quick in these parts." Beatrice's knees weakened beneath her, and she reached for the fence post to steady herself. Her entire plan, the journey west, the position she'd secured through her brother's connections, all of it had evaporated in an instant. The man observed her distress with a thoughtful expression. He gestured toward his modest homestead with a sweep of his hand. "Perhaps you were meant to find me instead." "I beg your pardon," Beatrice replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He extended his hand. "Garrett Young, and this here's the Lazy Y Ranch. Not much to look at compared to the Harringtons, but it's home." Beatrice stared at his outstretched hand before cautiously taking it. "Beatrice Ashford," she replied, noticing the calluses on his palm, evidence of years of hard work. "Miss Ashford, I can't offer you a position as a fancy governess, but as luck would have it, I'm in need of someone with education. Town's growing, and the schoolteacher left us last month. Got married and moved to Helena." He studied her face. "You look like a woman who might know her way around books." Beatrice blinked in surprise. I was a teacher in Boston before my father's passing." Garrett's face broke into a warm smile that transformed his features entirely. "Well now, if that ain't Providence. The town council's been desperate to find someone before the new term starts." A gust of wind blew across the open land, carrying with it the scent of sage and coming rain. Beatrice looked back at the dusty road she'd traveled, then toward the distant horizon where storm clouds were gathering. Her options were painfully limited. "I don't suppose there's a hotel in town where I might stay while I consider my options?" she asked. Garrett shook his head. "Custer's got a boarding house, but Martha Jenkins, who runs it, is visiting her sister in Virginia for another month. Closest proper accommodation would be in Miles City, and that's a day's ride." He nodded toward the darkening sky. "Storm's coming in, too." As if on cue, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the plains. "I can offer you the spare room for tonight," Garrett continued. "Tomorrow, I'll take you into town, introduce you to the council. If you're interested in the teaching position, that is." Beatrice hesitated. Accepting accommodation from a strange man when against everything she'd been taught was proper. But as another clap of thunder sounded, closer this time, she realized she had little choice. "That's very kind, Mr. Young. I accept your offer of shelter for the night." She straightened her spine, summoning what dignity she could. "And I would be interested in learning more about this teaching position." Garrett nodded, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes at her formal tone. "Let's get your things inside before the heavens open up." He moved to help with her trunk, lifting it effortlessly from the hired wagon that had brought her from the train station miles away. The driver, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, tipped his hat and turned the horses around, leaving Beatrice truly stranded at the Lazy Y Ranch. As the first fat droplets of rain began to fall, Garrett guided her toward the modest house. "It ain't much," he said, a note of apology in his voice, "but it's solid and dry." Crossing the threshold, Beatrice was surprised to find the interior neat and reasonably well kept. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a few pieces of sturdy furniture arranged around it. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that caught her immediate interest. "You have quite a collection," she remarked, moving closer to examine the titles. "Reading keeps the mind sharp during the long winters," Garrett replied, setting her trunk down. "My father believed education was important, even for a rancher." Beatrice ran her fingers along the spines: Shakespeare, Dickens, Whitman, as well as practical books on animal husbandry, botany, and medicine. This man was more than the simple cowboy she had first taken him for. Outside, the sky opened up, rain pounding against the roof and windows. Garrett moved to light a lamp as the room darkened with the storm. "I'll show you to your room, then fix us something to eat," he said. "You must be exhausted from your journey." The guest room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a handmade quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small dresser. A window looked out over the eastern pastures, now obscured by sheets of rain. "Thank you, Mr. Young." "This will be quite sufficient," Beatrice said, feeling oddly moved by his hospitality. "Garrett," he corrected with a slight smile. "Out here we don't stand much on formality." After he left her to refresh herself, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed, trying to absorb the dramatic shift in her circumstances. The teaching position could be a blessing, but it wasn't what she had planned. And this rancher, with his books and his kindness, was nothing like the rough frontier men she had been warned about. By the time she emerged from the room, Garrett had prepared a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. The aroma filled the small house, reminding Beatrice that she hadn't eaten since early morning. "I hope you're hungry," Garrett said, placing a plate on the worn wooden table. "It's not fancy city food, but it'll keep your strength up." "It smells wonderful," she replied honestly, taking a seat. As they ate, Garrett explained more about Kuster, the surrounding ranches, and the growing need for education as more families settled in the area. The previous school teacher had taught in a small building on the edge of town, with about 15 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. "The town's growing," he explained. "Railroads bringing more folks west every month. Council's even talking about building a proper schoolhouse by next year." Beatrice found herself warming to the idea. What subjects are expected to be taught? Reading, writing, arithmetic, of course. Some history and geography. Whatever else you think important. Garrett refilled her coffee cup. "Truth is, most of these kids won't get schooling beyond what you provide. Their parents want them prepared for the life they'll lead here." The responsibility of being these children's only formal education weighed on Beatrice, but it also sparked something in her, a sense of purpose that had been missing since her father's death had left her in reduced circumstances. "And the salary?" she asked practically. $20 a month, plus room and board with one of the families in town. Not a fortune, but living costs less out here than in Boston, I'd wager. Beatrice nodded slowly. It wasn't wealth, but it would allow her independence, something she valued deeply. The storm continued through the evening, the sound of rain on the roof creating a cozy atmosphere as they talked. Garrett proved to be well-read and thoughtful, surprising Beatrice with his knowledge of literature and current events, despite living so far from any major city. As the evening wore on, she found herself sharing more than she'd intended about her father's passing, the financial difficulties that had followed, and her decision to accept the governess position out west rather than marry the persistent but unpleasant suitor who had been her only option in Boston. "So you came west to escape marriage?" Garrett asked, amusement evident in his voice. "I came west for independence," Beatrice corrected him, "to make my own way." Garrett nodded, respect evident in his expression. "That takes courage. Most women wouldn't travel alone across the country into unknown territory." "Perhaps I'm not most women," she replied with a small smile. "No," he agreed, his green eyes studying her face in the lamplight. "I don't believe you are." The intensity of his gaze made Beatrice suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation alone together in his home, sharing personal stories. She stood, gathering their empty plates. "I should retire. It's been a long day, and if we're to go into town tomorrow, I should be well rested." Garrett seemed to sense her sudden discomfort and stood as well. "Of course. Sleep well, Miss Ashford." "Beatrice," she corrected him, feeling it only fair after he had insisted she use his given name. "Good night, Garrett." In her room, listening to the storm and the occasional creaks of the unfamiliar house, Beatrice reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. Just that morning, she had been certain of her path, governess to a wealthy family, a respectable position that would provide security if not excitement. Now she found herself contemplating becoming a frontier schoolteacher, staying in a small Montana town she'd never heard of before today, all because she had arrived at the wrong address, and a green-eyed rancher had suggested it might be fate. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, Beatrice felt a curious sense of anticipation. For the first time since leaving Boston, she fell asleep without worrying about what tomorrow would bring. Morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong. Beatrice woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the distant sound of activity outside. After dressing in one of her simpler gowns, a navy blue with modest white trim, she found Garrett in the kitchen, frying bacon and eggs. "Hope you slept well," he said, turning at her entrance. "Thought you might be hungry before we head into town." "Very thoughtful, thank you," she replied, noticing how the morning light highlighted golden strands in his brown hair. "Is there anything I can do to help? Coffee's ready in that pot. Cups are on the shelf above." They worked together comfortably, setting the table and preparing breakfast as if they'd done it many times before. The domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on Beatrice, who had always valued her independence, but sometimes found herself longing for companionship. Over breakfast, Garrett explained more about Kuster. The town had started as a small trading post 10 years earlier, growing steadily with the arrival of the railroad. Now it boasted a general store, a smithy, a small church, and even a weekly newspaper. "Most folks around here are ranchers or farmers," he explained. "Honest people working hard to build something. They value education even if some of them didn't get much of it themselves." "And your ranch?" Beatrice asked. "Do you manage it alone?" A shadow crossed Garrett's face. "My father and I ran it together until last year. He passed during a harsh winter. Now it's just me and a couple of hands who help with the cattle." "I'm sorry for your loss," Beatrice said softly. Understanding all too well the grief of losing a parent, Garrett nodded in acknowledgement. Been thinking of expanding, maybe adding sheep. Land to the north of here would be good for it. He gave a self-deprecating smile. Listen to me going on about ranching to a city lady. I find it interesting, she assured him. In Boston, we rarely consider where our meat and wool originate. After breakfast, they prepared for the trip to town. Beatrice changed into her traveling outfit again, while Garrett hitched his wagon. She emerged from the house to find him waiting, the wagon ready, his horse a magnificent chestnut gelding tethered behind. Thought you might like to see some of the countryside on our way, he explained, offering his hand to help her up to the seat. The journey to Kuster took a little over an hour, traveling along roads still muddy from the previous night's storm. Beatrice found herself enchanted by the vast Montana landscape, rolling hills covered in prairie grass, distant mountains providing a majestic backdrop, and a sky so wide and blue it seemed infinite. It's beautiful, she breathed, taking it all in. Different from Boston, I imagine, Garrett replied, glancing at her completely. There one is always surrounded by buildings and people. Here. She gestured at the open landscape. Here one can breathe. Garrett smiled, pleased by her appreciation. It gets under your skin, this land. Makes it hard to imagine living anywhere else. As they approached Kuster, Beatrice's nervousness returned. What if the town council didn't approve of her? What if they expected someone different for their children's education? The town itself was small but tidy, with a main street lined by wooden buildings, some boasting false fronts to appear more impressive. People moved about their business, pausing to look curiously as Garrett's wagon rolled in. Several called out greetings, which he returned with a wave or nod. Word travels fast, he explained, noticing Beatrice's surprise at being the object of such interest. By now, everyone probably knows about the Boston lady who showed up at my ranch. Wonderful, she murmured, straightening her back and lifting her chin, determined to make a good impression despite the circumstances. Garrett pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a building with Kuster Mercantile painted across its front. General Stores owned by Edwin Porter, who also happens to be head of the town council. Good place to start. Inside the store, shelves were stocked with an impressive array of goods from basic necessities like flour and sugar to more luxury items like printed fabrics and patent medicines. A bell above the door announced their entrance, bringing a portly man with spectacles from the back room. Garrett Young. Twice in 1 week must be a special occasion, the man called out jovially before his eyes fell on Beatrice. And who might this lovely lady be? Edwin, this is Miss Beatrice Ashford from Boston, Garrett introduced her. Miss Ashford, Edwin Porter. Edwin wiped his hands on his apron before offering one to Beatrice. A pleasure, Miss Ashford. What brings a Boston lady to our humble town? Garrett explained the situation: Beatrice's arrival at his ranch instead of the now departed Harrington estate, and her qualifications as a teacher. Edwin's expression grew increasingly interested. A trained teacher, you say, from Boston? His eyes lit up. Miss Ashford, you might just be the answer to our prayers. The council's been at its wits' end trying to find someone suitable before school should start next month. Mr. Young mentioned the position, Beatrice said. I would be interested in learning more about it. Edwin beamed. I can call an emergency meeting of the council for tomorrow. In the meantime, we need to find you accommodation. He frowned thoughtfully. With Martha away, the boarding house is closed. Miss Ashford is welcome to continue using my guest room until suitable arrangements can be made, Garrett offered, surprising Beatrice. The ranch is a bit out of town, but I come in regularly for supplies and could bring her in for school once it starts. Edwin raised an eyebrow at this suggestion, his gaze moving between Garrett and Beatrice with undisguised curiosity. "Well, that's mighty generous of you, Garrett, though some might find it a bit unconventional." Beatrice felt heat rising to her cheeks, suddenly aware of how the arrangement might appear to others. "I wouldn't want to impose further on Mr. Young's hospitality," she began. "No imposition," Garrett said firmly. "It's a big house for one person." Edwin seemed to consider this, then nodded. "Well, it would solve our immediate problem, and Garrett Young's reputation is beyond reproach in these parts." He smiled at Beatrice. "Perhaps you could help out at the ranch to earn your keep until school starts. Would make things more proper." The suggestion was sensible, giving purpose to her presence at the ranch beyond mere charity. "I would be happy to contribute however I can," Beatrice agreed. "Then it's settled," Edwin declared. "Council meeting tomorrow at 2 o'clock. In the meantime, let me show you our school." The school turned out to be a simple one-room building at the edge of town, with rows of rough-hewn desks facing a teacher's desk and blackboard. Bookshelves contained a modest collection of readers, a few mathematics texts, and some well-worn volumes of history and geography. "It's not much," Edwin apologized, "but the children are eager to learn. And as I said, we're hoping to build something more substantial next year if the town keeps growing." Beatrice walked slowly around the room, running her hand along the desks, picturing them filled with students. It was far different from the prestigious girls' school where she had taught in Boston, but there was something appealing about the simplicity, the directness of purpose. "I think it's perfect," she said finally, surprising both men with her enthusiasm. "There's real opportunity here." Edwin beamed. "That's the spirit. Now, let me introduce you to some of the townsfolk while you're here." The remainder of the day was spent meeting various residents of Kuster, the blacksmith and his wife, the pastor and his family, the publisher of the weekly newspaper, and several mothers whose children would be Beatrice's students. Everyone was welcoming, if curious about the Boston lady who had arrived so unexpectedly. By the time Garrett suggested they head back to the ranch, Beatrice's head was spinning with new names and faces, but she felt cautiously optimistic about her prospects in Kuster. As they drove back through the golden late afternoon light, Beatrice found herself studying Garrett's profile. He was handsome in a rugged way, nothing like the polished gentleman of Boston society. There was a straightforwardness to him that she found refreshing. No games, no hidden agendas, just honest directness. "Thank you," she said suddenly. He glanced at her. "For what?" "For everything. Taking me in when I arrived lost at your door, bringing me to town. Offering your continued hospitality." She hesitated. Most men wouldn't have been so kind to a stranger. Garrett's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "My mother taught me to treat others as I'd want to be treated if I were in their shoes." He was quiet for a moment before adding, "Besides, it's nice having someone else around the place again. Gets lonely, just me and the books for company." There was something in his tone that made Beatrice's heart ache a little. She understood loneliness all too well, the silence of empty rooms, meals eaten alone, the absence of someone to share thoughts and ideas with. "Well, I promise to be an interesting house guest for as long as I stay," she said lightly. "And I'm quite handy around a kitchen, despite my city upbringing." This earned her a smile. "Is that so? Well, I might just let you prove that at supper tonight." Back at the ranch, Garrett needed to tend to his animals and check a fence that had been damaged in the storm. Beatrice took the opportunity to explore the house more thoroughly, finding it modest but surprisingly comfortable. The previous day's journey and today's excitement had left her with a bone-deep weariness, however, and she soon found herself dozing in a chair by the window, a book of Whitman's poetry open on her lap. She woke to the gentle touch of Garrett's hand on her shoulder. "Sorry to wake you, but I thought you might want to freshen up before supper." Embarrassed at having been caught sleeping, Beatrice straightened quickly. "I must have been more tired than I realized," she said, smoothing her skirt. "It's been quite a journey for you," Garrett replied kindly. "Take your time. I'll get things started in the kitchen." After washing her face and hands and changing into a simpler dress, Beatrice joined him in the kitchen. Together, they prepared a meal of salt pork, potatoes, and fresh greens from Garrett's small garden. The domesticity of the activity struck Beatrice again, how comfortable it felt to work alongside him, how natural. Over supper, Garrett asked about her impressions of Kuster and its inhabitants. Beatrice found herself speaking candidly, sharing her genuine appreciation for the town's warmth and her excitement about the teaching opportunity. "I think I could be happy here," she admitted. "It's nothing like what I expected when I left Boston, but perhaps that's for the best." "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns," Garrett agreed. "When my father died, I thought about selling up, heading somewhere new, but this place." He gestured around them. "It's more than just land and buildings, it's home." "You've made it quite welcoming," Beatrice said softly. "Thank you for opening it to me." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. Garrett was the first to look away, clearing his throat. "Tomorrow, after the council meeting, we should stop by the mercantile and get whatever supplies you might need," he said. "Edwin's wife mentioned she has some fabric you might like for new curtains in the schoolhouse." The pragmatic shift in conversation broke the moment of intimacy, and Beatrice was grateful for it. This arrangement was temporary, she reminded herself. Once school started, she would likely move to lodgings in town. There was no sense in developing feelings for a man she had known for barely a day, no matter how kind or intriguing he might be. The following morning, Garrett showed Beatrice around the ranch before they headed into town. She met the two ranch hands, brothers named Tom and Joe Miller, who tipped their hats respectfully and seemed amused by her interest in their work with the cattle. "City folk usually don't care much for the day-to-day of ranching," Tom commented. "I find it fascinating," Beatrice replied honestly. "In Boston, we're so disconnected from where our food comes from," Joe grinned. "Well, miss, you're welcome to help us muck out the stalls any time you like." "Don't mind them," Garrett said as they walked toward the corral where several horses grazed. "They're not used to having a lady around." "And you are?" Beatrice asked before she could stop herself. Garrett looked at her, surprise evident in his expression before it gave way to a rueful smile. "Not particularly, no. My mother passed when I was 16, been mostly men around here since then." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said, regretting her flippant question. "It must have been difficult." "Life out here is often difficult," he replied without self-pity, "but it has its rewards." As if to demonstrate his point, he gestured toward the horizon, where the mountains rose majestically against the clear blue sky. A hawk circled lazily overhead, and in the distance, a small herd of pronghorn antelope could be seen grazing. "It's beautiful," Beatrice agreed. "So different from what I'm used to, but beautiful." Garrett's expression softened as he looked at her. "I'm glad you can see it. Some folks from back east only notice what's missing: the theaters, the fancy restaurants, the society gatherings." "I was never much for those anyway," Beatrice admitted. "My father used to say I was born in the wrong century, too independent-minded for my own good." This drew a genuine laugh from Garrett. "Out here, that independent spirit will serve you well." The town council meeting that afternoon proved successful beyond Beatrice's hopes. After reviewing her credentials and asking numerous questions about her teaching philosophy and experience, the 5 council members voted unanimously to offer her the position. "School term starts in 4 weeks," Edwin Porter informed her. "That should give you time to prepare lessons and get the schoolhouse in order. Salary is $20 a month, paid at the end of each month, plus an allowance for school supplies." "Thank you for this opportunity," Beatrice said sincerely. "I promise I'll do my best for the children of Kuster." "We have no doubt of that, Miss Ashford," replied Mrs. Henderson, the only female member of the council and wife of the town's physician. "And please, let me know if you need any assistance settling in. I know it must be quite an adjustment coming from Boston." As promised, after the meeting, Garrett took Beatrice to the mercantile to purchase supplies both for the schoolhouse and for her personal needs. Edwin's wife, Clara, proved to be a treasure trove of information about the town and its inhabitants, particularly the families whose children would be attending school. "The Wilsons have 4 children, all bright as buttons but wild as March hares," Clara confided as she measured out fabric for new curtains. "The youngest Miller boy is shy but has a gift for numbers, and little Sarah Blackwell has the sweetest singing voice you ever heard." Beatrice absorbed all this information gratefully, already thinking about how to structure her classroom to accommodate different ages and abilities. After completing their purchases, Garrett suggested they visit the newspaper office. "Might be good to introduce yourself to Harold Jenkins. He'll probably want to write a piece about the new schoolteacher." The Kuster Gazette operated out of a small building next to the barber shop. Inside, they found a thin man with ink-stained fingers arranging type for the next edition. "Harold," Garrett called, "got someone here you should meet." Harold looked up, pushing his spectacles higher on his nose. "Garrett Young. And who's this lovely lady?" Introductions were made, and as predicted, Harold was delighted to meet the town's new teacher. "This will make a fine front-page story for next week's edition," he declared. "Boston lady brings education to frontier town." Readers love that kind of thing. Before Beatrice quite knew what was happening, she found herself being interviewed about her background, her journey west, and her educational philosophy. Harold scribbled notes frantically, occasionally asking Garrett questions as well. "And how did you two meet?" he asked, pen poised expectantly. Garrett explained the mix-up with the Harrington estate, ending with, "So she arrived at the wrong address, but maybe it was meant to be." Kuster needed a teacher, and here she was. Harold's eyebrows rose slightly as he made another note. "Fascinating. Almost like fate, wouldn't you say?" Beatrice felt heat rising to her cheeks. "I wouldn't presume to know the workings of fate, Mr. Jenkins. But I am grateful for Mr. Young's hospitality and the opportunity to teach here." By the time they left the newspaper office, the sun was beginning to lower in the western sky. Garrett suggested they start back to the ranch, but as they approached the wagon, they were hailed by a well-dressed man emerging from the bank. "Garrett, heard you were in town today." The man approached, his gaze immediately settling on Beatrice with obvious interest. "Benjamin," Garrett nodded, his tone notably cooler than it had been with others in town. "Miss Ashford, this is Benjamin Caldwell, owner of the Circle C ranch north of mine. Benjamin, Miss Beatrice Ashford, Kuster's new schoolteacher." "A pleasure, Miss Ashford," Caldwell said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair slicked back with pomade. He was handsome in a conventional way, with sharp features and expensive clothes that seemed out of place in the frontier town. "Boston, I hear. You must find our little town quite primitive by comparison." "On the contrary, I find it charming," Beatrice replied politely. "Everyone has been most welcoming." "I'm sure." Caldwell's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Though I'm surprised to find you in Young's company. Surely there are more suitable arrangements for a lady of your background." The implication was clear, and Beatrice felt her spine stiffen. Before she could respond, Garrett spoke, his voice level but with an edge of steel. "Miss Ashford is staying at my ranch temporarily until proper lodgings can be arranged in town. The council is fully aware and approving of the situation." Of course," Caldwell said smoothly, though his expression suggested otherwise. "I merely thought a refined lady might prefer more comfortable accommodations. My own home is quite spacious, with a dedicated guest wing." "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Caldwell," Beatrice said coolly, "but I'm quite comfortable with my current arrangements." Something in Caldwell's expression hardened momentarily before he masked it with another smile. "Well, the offer stands. Garrett knows where to find me if you change your mind." He replaced his hat and nodded to them both. "Good day." As they walked away, Beatrice could feel tension radiating from Garrett. Once they were in the wagon and heading out of town, she ventured, "I take it you and Mr. Caldwell are not friends." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Benjamin Caldwell represents everything I dislike about some of the newcomers to this territory. He bought his ranch 3 years ago with Eastern money, hires gunmen instead of cowboys, and thinks he can buy whatever or whoever he wants. Including land adjoining yours," Beatrice guessed, remembering Garrett's comment about expanding northward. Garrett glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "You catch on quick. Yes, we've both had our eye on the same parcel of land that the government recently opened for claims. Difference is, I want it for grazing. He wants it because he doesn't like neighbors, he seems." "Unpleasant," Beatrice offered, thinking the word inadequate for the unsettling feeling Caldwell had given her. "He's worse than unpleasant," Garrett muttered. "He's dangerous. Believes rules don't apply to him because of his money." They rode in silence for a while, the tension gradually dissipating as they left town behind and entered the open country. Finally, Garrett sighed and his shoulders relaxed. "Sorry about that. Didn't mean to spoil the day with talk of Caldwell." "You didn't," Beatrice assured him. "Actually, it was a wonderful day. I'm quite excited about starting at the school." This brought a smile back to Garrett's face. "The kids will be lucky to have you. Most of them are good sorts, bit rough around the edges maybe, but eager to learn." By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in dramatic streaks of orange and purple. Beatrice paused to admire it as Garrett helped her down from the wagon. "Another perk of ranch life," he said, following her gaze. "Best sunsets in the territory." "It's magnificent," she breathed, entranced by the play of colors. For a moment, they stood side by side, watching as the sun slipped below the horizon. Beatrice was acutely aware of Garrett's presence beside her, the height of him, the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling evening air, the faint scent of leather and horses that seemed to cling to him. "We should head in," he said finally, his voice oddly husky. "Getting chilly out here." Inside, they moved around each other with growing familiarity as they prepared a simple supper. Beatrice found herself enjoying the domesticity of it, setting the table while Garrett stoked the fire, working together to produce a meal that they would share. Over supper, they discussed plans for the coming weeks. Beatrice would need to inventory the school supplies, review the existing textbooks, and prepare lessons for multiple grade levels. Garrett offered to help her clean and organize the schoolhouse. "I'm handy with tools if anything needs fixing," he added. "That building's been sitting empty all summer." "Thank you," Beatrice said, touched by his offer. "I'd appreciate the help." As they washed the dishes together afterward, Beatrice found herself studying Garrett's profile in the lamplight. There was something deeply appealing about him, not just his physical appearance, though that was certainly pleasant, but his character. He was straightforward, honest, hard-working. The kind of man who did the right thing simply because it was right, not for recognition or reward. "You're staring," he observed without looking at her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Beatrice felt heat rush to her face. "I was just thinking. About, about how different this all is from what I expected when I left Boston." She hesitated, then added softly, "Not in a bad way." Now he did look at her, his green eyes searching her face. "Are you really okay with all this? The small town, the one-room schoolhouse, the lack of, well, civilization as you know it. Kuster may be small, but it has everything that truly matters," Beatrice replied thoughtfully. "Good people building something together. Children who need education, purpose." She smiled. "Besides, I'm discovering I rather like the open spaces and the big sky." Garrett's expression softened. "It grows on you, like a burr on your saddle blanket." Beatrice laughed at the unexpected comparison. "A rather prickly metaphor, Mr. Young." "Just being honest," he grinned, returning to the dishes. Later, as Beatrice prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on how quickly her life had changed. Just 3 days ago, she had been traveling to what she thought would be a position as governess to a wealthy family. Now, she was preparing to become the schoolteacher for an entire frontier town, staying in the home of a bachelor rancher, and feeling more content than she had in years. The following weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Most days, Beatrice and Garrett would ride into town together to work on the schoolhouse. She organized books, created lesson plans, and wrote to her brother in Boston requesting additional supplies. Garrett repaired broken desks, fixed leaky windows, and built new bookshelves. The townspeople quickly accepted Beatrice, inviting her to Sunday services, afternoon teas, and family dinners. She met most of her future students and their parents, carefully noting each child's temperament and interests to help plan her approach to teaching them. In the evenings, she and Garrett would return to the ranch, prepare supper together, and often spend hours in conversation by the fire. Beatrice learned about ranching, about the challenges and rewards of life in the Montana Territory. Garrett, in turn, listened with genuine interest to her stories of Boston, asking thoughtful questions about the city and its culture. "I've never been further east than Chicago," he admitted one evening. "Sometimes I think I should see more of the country, but then—" He gestured toward the window beyond which lay his land. "This place has a way of holding on to you. It's not hard to understand why," Beatrice replied. "There's a freedom here that doesn't exist in the city, a sense of possibility." As the days passed, Beatrice found herself increasingly drawn to Garrett. It wasn't just his physical appeal, though that was undeniable, but his intellect, his quiet strength, his unfailing kindness. She caught herself watching him as he worked, admiring the grace with which he moved, the competence of his hands. For his part, Garrett seemed to enjoy her company as well, often finding reasons to be wherever she was. He introduced her to his favorite places on the ranch, a small pond surrounded by cottonwoods, a hilltop with a view that stretched for miles, a grove of aspens whose leaves danced in the slightest breeze. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after her arrival, they rode to a beautiful spot by a creek that cut through Garrett's property. The late summer day was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze rustling through the tall grass. "This is where I come when I need to think," Garrett said as they dismounted. "Or when I just need to remember why all the hard work is worth it." Beatrice could understand why. The spot was tranquil, with the creek bubbling over rocks, creating a soothing melody. Wildflowers dotted the grassy banks, and a pair of hawks circled lazily overhead. "It's lovely," she said, breathing deeply of the clean air scented with grass and wildflowers. They spread a blanket on the ground and shared the picnic lunch. Beatrice had prepared cold chicken, bread, cheese and apple tarts. As they ate, Garrett told her stories of growing up on the ranch, of learning to ride almost before he could walk, of his father teaching him to track animals and read the weather. "You loved him very much," Beatrice observed softly. Garrett nodded, his eyes on the distant mountains. "He was a good man, taught me everything important." He looked at her then. "What about your father? You've mentioned him, but not much about him." Beatrice smiled sadly. "He was a professor of literature at Harvard, brilliant, kind, but not very practical when it came to money. When he died, I discovered he had debts I knew nothing about. The house had to be sold to pay them, leaving me with very little." "That must have been difficult," Garrett said, his voice gentle. "Losing him and your home." "It was," Beatrice admitted, "but in some ways it was also liberating. Without the house to maintain, without the expectations of Boston society, I was free to make my own choices." She plucked a wildflower from the grass beside the blanket, "including the choice to come west." "Are you glad you did?" Garrett asked, watching her twirl the flower between her fingers. "Even with the unexpected detour to my doorstep," Beatrice met his gaze, feeling a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the sunshine. "Especially because of that," she said softly. Something changed in Garrett's expression, a softening, an intensity that made Beatrice's heart beat faster. For a moment, she thought he might lean closer, might even kiss her. Part of her hoped he would. Instead, he cleared his throat and looked away. "We should head back soon." Storm clouds building to the west. Beatrice felt a pang of disappointment but nodded, understanding the practicalities of ranch life. Weather was not something to be taken lightly out here. As they packed up their picnic and mounted their horses, Beatrice couldn't help wondering if she had imagined the moment of connection between them. Perhaps Garrett saw her only as a temporary house guest, someone to be helped out of Christian charity rather than any deeper interest. The thought troubled her more than it should have. After all, her position in Kuster was what mattered, the teaching job, the opportunity to build a new life. Her feelings for Garrett were a complication she hadn't anticipated and perhaps shouldn't encourage. By the time they reached the ranch, the western sky was indeed darkening with approaching storm clouds. The air had that particular stillness that precedes a major weather event, and the ranch hands were busy securing equipment and animals. "This looks serious," Beatrice observed as they unsaddled their horses. "Could be," Garrett agreed, glancing at the sky with the practiced eye of someone who had lived his life reading weather patterns. "Best prepare for a rough night." They worked together to secure the house, closing shutters, bringing in extra firewood, filling lamps with oil in case the storm knocked down the single telegraph line that brought limited electricity to the ranch house. As darkness fell, the storm hit with unexpected fury. Wind howled around the eaves of the house, rain lashed against the windows, and lightning split the sky with brilliant flashes followed by bone-rattling thunder. Beatrice, who had never experienced such a violent storm, found herself jumping at particularly loud thunderclaps. Garrett, noticing her discomfort, built up the fire and made hot chocolate, a luxury he usually saved for special occasions. "Storms like this are rare, even out here," he told her as they sat before the fire, mugs of chocolate warming their hands. "But they're magnificent in their own way." A tremendous crash of thunder made Beatrice flinch. Garrett, sitting beside her on the sofa, instinctively reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "It's just noise," he said gently. "We're safe here." Beatrice nodded but didn't pull her hand away. The warmth of his fingers around hers was comforting, grounding. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm not usually so easily frightened." "Nothing wrong with a healthy respect for nature's power," Garrett replied, his thumb moving in a small, soothing circle on the back of her hand. They sat that way for some time, hands joined, watching the fire and listening to the storm rage outside. There was an intimacy to the moment that went beyond physical touch, a sense of being sheltered together against the elements, of finding comfort in each other's presence. When Beatrice finally withdrew her hand, it was with reluctance. "I should get some rest," she said, though the thought of being alone in her room with the storm still raging was not appealing. Garrett nodded but seemed equally reluctant to end the evening. "Of course. I'll make sure the fire stays going through the night." At her bedroom door, Beatrice paused. "Thank you, Garrett, not just for tonight, but for everything since I arrived." She hesitated, then added softly, "I'm beginning to think that mix-up with addresses was the best thing that could have happened to me." In the shadowy hallway, lit only by the lamp she carried, Garrett's expression was difficult to read. But his voice, when he spoke, held a warmth that wrapped around her like a blanket. "I'm beginning to think the same thing, Beatrice." She slept surprisingly well despite the continuing storm and awoke to a world transformed. The rain had stopped, but the land was drenched, puddles reflecting the morning sky like scattered mirrors. From her window, she could see branches down in the yard and debris scattered across the usually tidy ranch. Dressing quickly, she found Garrett already outside, assessing the damage with his ranch hands. When he saw her step onto the porch, he raised a hand in greeting and made his way over to her. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Could have been worse," he replied, running a hand through hair damp with dew and exertion. "Lost a section of fence along the north pasture, and the creek's overflowing its banks a bit. Nothing that can't be fixed." "How can I help?" The question seemed to surprise and please him. "Most Boston ladies I've met would be more concerned with keeping their skirts clean than helping repair storm damage." "I'm not most Boston ladies," Beatrice reminded him with a smile. "Besides, this is my home too, at least for now." Something flickered in Garrett's eyes at her words, something that might have been hope. "Well, if you're serious, you could help me check the chicken coop. Think some of the roof might have come loose." They spent the morning working side by side, repairing what they could and making note of bigger jobs that would require additional help or materials. Beatrice surprised Garrett with her willingness to get dirty and her quick learning of unfamiliar tasks. "You're something else, Beatrice Ashford," he said as they stopped for a midday meal, both muddy and tired but satisfied with their progress. "I'll take that as a compliment," she replied, wiping her hands on a towel. "It was meant as one." His gaze lingered on her face, making her heart beat a little faster. "You fit here better than you have any right to, given where you come from." "Perhaps I was always meant to be here," Beatrice said, surprising herself with the sentiment. "Just took me a while to find my way." The days that followed brought them closer still. Working together to repair storm damage created a partnership neither had anticipated, but both came to value. Garrett began teaching Beatrice more about the ranch operations, and she proved an apt pupil, eager to learn and unafraid of hard work. In town, preparations for the school term continued. The schoolhouse was nearly ready, with fresh paint on the walls, new curtains at the windows, and desks arranged in neat rows. Edwin Porter had ordered the additional books Beatrice requested, and mothers in the community were spreading the word about the start date. A week before school was to begin, Martha Jenkins returned to town and reopened the boarding house. The town council had arranged for Beatrice to take a room there, as was proper for a single lady, especially one in a position of community respect like the school teacher. The evening before she was to move to town, Beatrice and Garrett sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching another spectacular sunset. Neither had spoken much during supper, both aware that their comfortable routine was about to change. "I've asked Tom to drive you and your things into town tomorrow," Garrett said finally, breaking the silence. "I'd do it myself, but there's a cattle buyer coming from Miles City I need to meet with." "Of course," Beatrice nodded, trying to ignore the pang of disappointment. She had hoped for a few more hours in his company before the move. "Thank you for arranging it." Silence fell between them again, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Garrett turned to her, his expression serious. "Beatrice, these past weeks—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Having you here has been— well, I'm going to miss your company." The simple admission warmed her. "I'll miss being here too," she replied softly. "It's come to feel like home in a way I didn't expect." Garrett's gaze intensified. "It could be, your home." Beatrice's heart stuttered in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm not saying it well," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "What I mean is, I care for you, Beatrice, more than I expected to, more than might be wise given how short a time we've known each other." She swallowed, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe. "I care for you too, Garrett." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know you're just starting your life here, just beginning this teaching position you're excited about. I don't want to complicate things for you, but—" He took a deep breath. "I needed you to know how I feel before you leave tomorrow." Beatrice turned her hand in his, threading their fingers together. "You're not complicating anything. You're the reason I've come to love it here." The admission hung in the air between them, a threshold crossed. Garrett's eyes searched her face, finding only sincerity there. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned closer. Their first kiss was gentle, almost hesitant a question being asked and answered. When they parted, Beatrice found herself trembling slightly, overwhelmed by the rush of emotion. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," Garrett confessed, his voice husky. "Why didn't you?" she asked, still close enough to feel his breath on her face. "Wasn't sure you felt the same way. Wasn't sure it was right with you staying here." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "Didn't want you to think I expected anything in return for helping you." "I never thought that," Beatrice assured him. Not for a moment. This time when he kissed her, there was nothing hesitant about it. His arms went around her, drawing her closer, and Beatrice responded with a fervor that surprised them both. It was as if all the feelings that had been building between them over the past weeks were finally being acknowledged, released in this meeting of lips and embrace of arms. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing harder. Garrett rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "This changes things," he murmured. "Does it have to?" Beatrice asked. "I still need to teach to fulfill my commitment to the town, and you have the ranch to run." Garrett pulled back slightly to look at her. "What are you suggesting?" "That we give ourselves time," she said reasonably. "I'll move to the boarding house as planned, begin teaching, establish myself in the community. We can court properly, get to know each other better." A slow smile spread across his face. "Court, is it? That's mighty formal, Miss Ashford." "Well, Mr. Young," she replied, matching his teasing tone, "I am the school teacher now. I have a reputation to maintain." He laughed, the sound rich and warm in the gathering dusk. "Fair enough. But I hope proper courting still allows for this." He kissed her again, briefly but with feeling. "I believe it does," Beatrice said when they parted, her cheeks flushed. "Within reason, of course." "Of course," Garrett agreed, his eyes dancing with amusement and something deeper, more profound. "Beatrice Ashford, may I have the honor of calling on you regularly with the intention of courting you?" The formal request, delivered with a hint of playfulness but underlying sincerity, made her smile. "Yes, Garrett Young, you may." Later that night, in her room, Beatrice sat by the window looking out at the star-filled sky. Her heart felt full to bursting with happiness and hope for the future, a future so different from anything she had imagined when she left Boston. yet somehow exactly right. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as Beatrice packed her belongings and prepared to leave the ranch. Tom hitched the wagon while she and Garrett shared a final breakfast together in the kitchen that had become so familiar. "I'll be in town day after tomorrow," Garrett told her. "Thought I might take you to dinner at the hotel restaurant if you're free." "I'd like that," Beatrice replied, "though I suspect by then everyone in town will know about our arrangement." Garrett grimaced slightly. "Small towns, no secrets." "I don't consider this a secret," she said firmly. "Just private for now." When the time came to leave, their goodbye was brief but poignant. Standing beside the loaded wagon out of Tom's earshot, Garrett took both her hands in his. "Thank you for arriving at the wrong address that day," he said softly. "Thank you for suggesting I was meant to find you instead," she replied, squeezing his hands. He kissed her once, quickly, before helping her up to the wagon seat. As Tom clicked to the horses and the wagon began to roll away, Beatrice looked back to see Garrett standing there, watching her go, his tall figure silhouetted against the morning sun. The boarding house proved comfortable if not luxurious. Martha Jenkins was a cheerful widow in her 50s who took an immediate liking to Beatrice and showed her to a pleasant room overlooking the town's main street. The house had 3 other boarders: a young man who worked at the bank, an elderly lady who gave piano lessons, and a middle-aged gentleman who traveled for a farming equipment company. "Meals are at 7, noon, and 6, Martha explained. "I don't allow liquor on the premises, and gentlemen callers must be received in the parlor only, with the door open." She gave Beatrice a knowing look. "Though I hear young Garrett Young might be calling on you regular like." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. "News travels fast in Kuster." Martha chuckled. "Honey, in a town this size, news travels before it even happens. But don't you worry, Garrett's well respected here. No one will think less of you for keeping company with him." The first day of school arrived, bringing with it a mixture of excitement and nerves. Beatrice dressed carefully in a high-necked blue dress that was practical yet professional, pinning her hair in a neat chignon at the nape of her neck. Standing before the small mirror in her room, she hardly recognized herself, the Boston society girl transformed into a frontier schoolteacher. The schoolhouse was already filling with children and parents when she arrived. 15 students in all, ranging from 6-year-old Sarah Blackwell with her golden curls and shy smile to 16-year-old James Wilson, tall and lanky, clearly uncomfortable with his recent growth spurt. Beatrice took a deep breath and stepped to the front of the room, ringing the small bell on her desk for attention. The chattering voices gradually quieted as all eyes turned toward her. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and confident despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I am Miss Ashford, and I am very pleased to be your new teacher here in Kuster." The day passed in a blur of introductions, assessments of abilities, and establishment of rules and expectations. By the time the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Beatrice was exhausted but exhilarated. The children had been responsive and generally well-behaved, if a bit rowdy after a summer without formal schooling. As the last student filed out, Beatrice sank into her chair, both pleased with how the day had gone and overwhelmed by the task ahead. Teaching multiple grade levels simultaneously would be challenging, requiring careful planning and management. A knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Looking up, she was surprised and delighted to see Garrett standing there, hat in hand. "Thought you were meeting with cattle buyers today," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Finished early," he replied, stepping into the room. "Wanted to see how your first day went." The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "It went well, I think." "The children are eager to learn for the most part." "For the most part," Garrett raised an eyebrow, coming to perch on the edge of a student desk near hers. Let's just say young Thomas Wilson may present some challenges, Beatrice said diplomatically. He seems to prefer entertaining his classmates to focusing on his studies. Garrett chuckled. That sounds like Thomas. Been getting into mischief since he could walk. His heart's in the right place, though. They talked for a while longer, Beatrice sharing stories from her first day, Garrett offering insights about the children and their families that would help her in the classroom. It felt so natural, this sharing of their days, this partnership of minds and hearts. As evening approached, Garrett reluctantly stood to leave. I should let you get back to the boarding house. Mrs. Jenkins strikes me as the type who doesn't hold supper for latecomers. You're right about that, Beatrice agreed, gathering her papers. She runs a tight ship. At the schoolhouse door, away from prying eyes, Garrett briefly took her hand, his thumb caressing her palm in a gesture that sent warmth spreading through her. I'll see you tomorrow evening for dinner, he confirmed. I'm looking forward to it, Beatrice replied softly. As promised, the following evening Garrett took her to dinner at the small hotel restaurant, the closest thing Kuster had to fine dining. The proprietor, Mr. Simmons, seated them at a table by the window and presented them with menus handwritten on heavy card stock. Special occasion. He asked with a knowing smile. Just welcoming Miss Ashford properly to Kuster, Garrett replied smoothly, though the way his eyes lingered on Beatrice suggested more. The meal was pleasant, the food simple but well prepared. Beatrice found herself relaxing in Garrett's company, their conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. He told her about his meeting with the cattle buyers, his plans for improving the herd's bloodlines, his hopes for expanding the ranch. She shared more detailed impressions of her students, ideas for classroom projects, books she hoped to acquire for the small school library. As they were finishing dessert, an apple pie that Beatrice declared rivaled any she'd tasted in Boston, a shadow fell across their table. Looking up, she was dismayed to see Benjamin Caldwell standing there, an insincere smile on his handsome face. Well now, isn't this cozy, he drawled. The schoolmarm and the rancher, town's already talking about it. Garrett's expression hardened. Evening, Benjamin. Something we can help you with, just being neighborly, Caldwell replied, making sure Miss Ashford is settling in well. His gaze shifted to Beatrice, becoming more intense. My offer of more suitable accommodation still stands, you know. The Circle C has plenty of room, and I'd ensure you had every comfort. Before Beatrice could respond, Garrett spoke, his voice level but with an unmistakable edge. Miss Ashford is quite comfortable at the boarding house, Benjamin, and she's here having dinner with me, not you. The tension between the two men was palpable. Caldwell's smile faded, his eyes turning cold. I see how it is, he said after a moment. Well, Miss Ashford, when you tire of playing pioneer with young Garrett here, remember there are other options. With a tip of his hat, he turned and walked away. I apologize for that, Garrett said once Caldwell was out of earshot. Benjamin doesn't take kindly to being refused anything he wants, and he wants. Beatrice let the question hang. Land, power, respect, Garrett replied grimly. And apparently now you. The possessive note in his voice sent a not unpleasant shiver down Beatrice's spine. Well, Mr. Caldwell will be disappointed, she said firmly. I make my own choices and they don't include him. Garrett's expression softened, his hand finding hers across the table. Have I told you lately that you're remarkable, Beatrice Ashford? The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that suited them both. Beatrice threw herself into teaching, gradually winning the respect and affection of even her most challenging students. Garrett managed his ranch while making time to court her properly, taking her to church socials, community dances, and quiet dinners at the hotel restaurant. Their relationship deepened with each encounter, each conversation, each shared experience. Beatrice found herself thinking of him throughout the day, looking forward to their time together with an eagerness that both thrilled and slightly alarmed her. Never had she felt this way about any man in Boston. For his part, Garrett made no secret of his feelings. He brought her wildflowers, remembered details from their conversations, listened to her ideas about education with genuine interest. When they were alone sitting on the boarding house porch after dinner or walking by the creek on a Sunday afternoon, he would hold her hand, sometimes steal a kiss that left her breathless. Benjamin Caldwell continued to be a disruptive presence. He appeared too frequently in town when Beatrice was there, offering rides in his fine buggy, inviting her to tour his ranch, even sending expensive gifts to the boarding house which she promptly returned. "Man can't take a hint," Garrett commented one evening after they'd encountered Caldwell outside the general store. "I've been as clear as I know how to be," Beatrice sighed. "Short of being outright rude, which would reflect poorly on my position as teacher." Garrett squeezed her hand reassuringly. "He'll give up eventually. Even Benjamin Caldwell must have limits to his persistence." But as autumn progressed, Caldwell's attention seemed only to increase, becoming more aggressive in nature. Rumors circulated that he had begun buying up properties adjacent to the Lazy Y, effectively surrounding Garrett's ranch. "He's trying to squeeze me out," Garrett explained grimly when Beatrice asked about the rumors. "If he controls all the land around mine, he can limit my access to water, to grazing land, even to the road into town." "Can he do that legally?" Beatrice asked, alarmed. "There are ways around the law out here," Garrett replied, "and Benjamin has the money to find them." The situation came to a head in early November. Beatrice was walking back to the boarding house after school when Caldwell's expensive buggy pulled up beside her. "Afternoon, Miss Ashford," he called, tipping his hat. "Allow me to drive you home. Looks like snow's coming." Indeed, the sky had that heavy gray look that presaged the first snowfall of the season, but Beatrice shook her head. "Thank you, but it's not far. I prefer to walk." To her dismay, Caldwell pulled his horse to a stop and jumped down from the buggy, moving to block her path. "Miss Ashford, Beatrice," he said, his voice taking on a note of urgency, "I've been patient. I've tried to be a gentleman, but my patience is wearing thin." Beatrice took a step back, suddenly aware of how alone they were on the street. "Mr. Caldwell, please excuse me. I need to get home." "Home?" he scoffed. "That shabby boarding house. You deserve better, Beatrice. I can give you better." He reached for her arm. "Come with me to the Circle C. Let me show you what I'm offering." Beatrice pulled away from his grasp. "I'm not interested in your offers, Mr. Caldwell." "Now please let me pass." His expression darkened. "It's young, isn't it? You've let that dirt poor rancher turn your head." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "What does he have that I don't? I've got 10 times the land, 100 times the money. I could give you everything." "Except respect," Beatrice replied coldly. "Except kindness. Except the right to make my own choices." Anger flashed in Caldwell's eyes. He grabbed her arm again, harder this time. "You're making the wrong choice, Beatrice, and you'll regret it. Let her go, Benjamin." The voice came from behind them, steady and dangerous. Beatrice turned to see Garrett approaching, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. She had never seen him wear it in town before, and the sight sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the approaching snow. Caldwell released her arm but didn't back away. "This doesn't concern you, Young. Miss Ashford concerns me," Garrett replied evenly. "And you're frightening her." "Frightening her," Caldwell laughed harshly. "I'm trying to save her from a life of poverty with a failing rancher." Your land's nearly worthless now that I control the water rights to the north and east. How long before the bank forecloses, Garrett? A year. Less. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he kept his focus on Beatrice. Are you all right? She nodded, moving to stand beside him. I'm fine. Mr. Caldwell was just leaving. For a tense moment, it seemed Caldwell might escalate the confrontation, but then he shrugged, a cold smile playing on his lips. This isn't over, he said quietly. Either of you. With that, he returned to his buggy and drove away, the expensive vehicle kicking up dust in the late autumn air. Once he was gone, Beatrice let out a shaky breath. Thank you for coming when you did. Garrett's arm went around her protectively. I was at the general store and saw him stop you. His eyes searched her face. Did he hurt you? No, just frightened me a little. She shivered, not entirely from the cold. Garrett, what he said about the water rights. A shadow crossed Garrett's face. It's true. He's bought the Johnson place to the north and the old Michaels claim to the east. Both control streams that feed into my land. He tried to smile reassuringly. But don't worry, I'll figure something out. The first snowflakes began to fall as they walked to the boarding house, fat white flakes that melted as soon as they touched the ground. By morning, Beatrice knew the world would be transformed, covered in winter's first blanket. At the boarding house steps, Garrett paused. I need to get back to the ranch before this weather worsens. Will you be all right? Of course, she assured him, though she was still shaken by the encounter with Caldwell. Be careful riding home. He hesitated, then said softly, I love you, Beatrice. I think I have since that first day when you showed up lost at my gate. The words, spoken so simply and directly, filled her heart. I love you too, Garrett. Please be careful not just on the ride home but with Caldwell. He seems dangerous. I can handle Benjamin, Garrett said, kissing her briefly before mounting his horse. I'll see you tomorrow, snow permitting. But the snow fell heavily through the night, and by morning, Kuster was blanketed in white. School was canceled for the day, as many of the children lived too far out to safely make the journey in. Beatrice spent the day at the boarding house, grading papers and preparing lessons, but her thoughts kept returning to Garrett and the threat Caldwell posed to his ranch and potentially to both of them. 3 days passed before the snow melted enough for normal travel to resume. Garrett had not come into town, and Beatrice found herself growing increasingly worried. When school finally reopened, she was distracted, her mind on the lazy Y and its owner rather than on the reading lessons she was attempting to teach. After dismissing the children for the day, she was surprised to find Tom Miller, one of Garrett's ranch hands, waiting outside the schoolhouse. Miss Ashford, he said, removing his hat. Boss sent me to fetch you if you're willing. Says it's important. Is something wrong? Beatrice asked, her heart rate quickening. Is Garrett all right? He's fine, madam. Just asked me to bring you out to the ranch if you could spare the time. Said to tell you he's sorry he couldn't come himself. Beatrice hesitated only briefly before nodding. Let me get my coat and leave a note for Mrs. Jenkins. The ride to the Lazy Y seemed longer than she remembered, though perhaps that was due to her concern. Tom was taciturn by nature and offered little conversation beyond assurances that Garrett was indeed physically well. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Beatrice was struck by how much she had missed the place in the weeks since moving to town. Though she had come to appreciate the conveniences of living at the boarding house, there was something about the Lazy Y that felt like home in a way no other place ever had. Garrett was waiting on the porch, his face lighting up at the sight of her. As Tom helped her down from the wagon, Garrett came to greet her, taking both her hands in his. Thank you for coming, he said, his green eyes searching her face as if memorizing every detail. I've missed you. I've been worried, she replied. Why didn't you come to town? His expression grew more serious. "Come inside. There's something we need to discuss." In the familiar main room of the ranch house, with a fire crackling in the hearth against the November chill, Garrett explained the situation. "Caldwell's made his move," he said grimly. "He's dammed up the creek on the Johnson property, cutting off my main water source. And he's blocked the old trail across the Michaels land that I used to move cattle to the eastern pastures." Beatrice gasped. "Can he do that legally?" "It's a gray area," Garrett admitted. "Water rights are complicated out here. I could fight it in court, but that takes money and time, both of which are in short supply." "What will you do?" she asked, already dreading the answer. Garrett paced the room, hands clasped behind his back. "I've received an offer from a buyer in Miles City. Fair price for the land and cattle, considering the circumstances. You're selling the ranch." Beatrice couldn't keep the shock from her voice. "But this is your home, your heritage." "I know." He stopped pacing, turning to face her. "But I'm thinking about the future now, not just the past." "Our future, Beatrice." Her heart skipped at his words. "Our future." Garrett crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her and taking her hands in his. "I love you. I want to build a life with you. But I can't ask you to tie yourself to a failing ranch, to a man who might not be able to provide for you properly." "Garrett," Beatrice began, but he continued, his words coming faster now, as if he feared losing courage. "The buyer's offering enough to purchase a smaller spread, maybe near Helena or Bozeman. Or," he took a deep breath, "or we could go east if that's what you wanted, back to civilization. I know you must miss it sometimes." Beatrice stared at him, stunned by what he was suggesting. "You would leave Montana. For me, I would go anywhere with you," he said simply. "I told you once that this land gets under your skin, makes it hard to imagine living anywhere else. But I've learned something these past months, Beatrice. It's not the land that holds me here anymore. It's you." Tears welled in her eyes at the depth of feeling in his voice. "Oh, Garrett, I don't want to leave Montana. I don't want you to give up your dream." "Then what do you want?" he asked softly. "I want you," she replied, touching his face gently. "I want us. And I want to fight for this ranch, not surrender it to a man like Benjamin Caldwell." Hope flickered in Garrett's eyes. "It won't be easy. Caldwell has money connections." "And we have what?" Beatrice challenged. "Determination, intelligence. The support of an entire community that knows exactly what kind of man Caldwell is. That seems a fair match to me." A slow smile spread across Garrett's face. "Have I mentioned lately that you're remarkable, Beatrice Ashford?" "You have." She smiled back through her tears. "But I don't mind hearing it again." Garrett rose, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "More than I can say." "I love you too," she whispered back. "Enough to fight for our future, whatever that takes." In that moment, with his arms around her and his heart beating against hers, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that she had indeed been meant to find him that day, meant to arrive at the wrong address and be redirected to the right future. As winter settled over Montana, Beatrice and Garrett formulated their plan. With the help of Edwin Porter and Harold Jenkins from the newspaper, they began researching land and water rights laws, looking for weaknesses in Caldwell's position. Harold published a series of articles about the importance of fair access to natural resources, never mentioning Caldwell by name, but making the situation clear to everyone in the area. Edwin used his connections as head of the town council to reach out to the territorial legislature about clarifying water rights regulations. Meanwhile, Garrett worked tirelessly to find alternative water sources for his cattle, digging wells and creating catchment systems for snow melt. Beatrice continued teaching during the week, but spent every weekend at the ranch, helping however she could and providing moral support when the challenges seemed overwhelming. Their relationship deepened through the shared struggle. Working toward a common goal, facing adversity together, they discovered new dimensions to their love, a resilience, a partnership of equals that neither had experienced before. By Christmas, their efforts were beginning to show results. The territorial legislature had taken an interest in the water rights dispute, sending a representative to investigate. Several of Caldwell's less savory business dealings had come to light, damaging his reputation and causing some of his financial backers to reconsider their support. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, Garrett built a roaring fire in the ranch house hearth and prepared a special dinner for Beatrice. He had ridden into town to fetch her from the boarding house, receiving a knowing smile from Mrs. Jenkins as he explained Beatrice would be returning the following day. The table was set with Garrett's mother's best china, carefully stored away since her passing and brought out now for this occasion. A small pine tree stood in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments and candles, a tradition Garrett explained his mother had brought from her native Germany. "It's beautiful," Beatrice said, taking in the festive scene. "You went to so much trouble." "Nothing's too much trouble for you," Garrett replied, helping her remove her heavy winter coat. Dinner was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, and vegetables from Garrett's root cellar, followed by an apple pie that Mrs. Jenkins had contributed to the occasion. They talked and laughed, putting aside their concerns about Caldwell and the ranch for this one evening of celebration. After dinner, they sat before the fire, Beatrice nestled against Garrett's side, his arm around her shoulders. Outside, the snow continued to fall, insulating the world in white silence. "I have something for you," Garrett said after a comfortable silence. "A Christmas gift." "You didn't need to get me anything," Beatrice protested. "Your companionship is gift enough." He smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Humor me." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with a simple red ribbon. Beatrice took it with hands that suddenly trembled slightly. "Open it," he encouraged softly. Inside the box was a ring, a delicate band of gold supporting a small but perfect diamond that caught the firelight and reflected it back in tiny rainbows. "It was my mother's," Garrett explained, his voice husky with emotion. "My father gave it to her when he asked her to be his wife. Now I'm asking you." Beatrice looked up at him, her heart so full she could barely speak. "Garrett, Beatrice Ashford, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here on this land, in this house that's been so empty without you?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Garrett Young." He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if it had been made for her. Then he gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of all they had shared and all that was yet to come. "When?" he asked when they finally parted. "Spring," Beatrice replied without hesitation. "When the land comes back to life. When we know for certain the ranch is secure." Garrett nodded, understanding her desire to wait until their battle with Caldwell was resolved one way or another. "Spring it is." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Kuster after the holidays. Most of the town expressed delight and support, though a few eyebrows were raised at the schoolteacher marrying a rancher. Beatrice found she cared little for others' opinions. Her happiness was too complete to be diminished by gossip or speculation. Benjamin Caldwell's reaction was less benign. Upon hearing of the engagement, he redoubled his efforts to pressure Garrett into selling, even resorting to threats delivered via hired men who happened to encounter Garrett in town. "He's growing desperate," Garrett observed after one such incident in early February. "That's good. It means he's feeling the pressure too." Indeed, the territorial legislature had become increasingly involved in the water dispute, sending surveyors to map the watersheds and review historical usage patterns. Caldwell's attempts to block access were being scrutinized, and not favorably. By March, as the first hints of spring began to soften the Montana landscape, the situation had shifted decisively. The legislature ruled that while Caldwell owned the land, he could not unreasonably restrict the natural flow of water to downstream properties, including the Lazy Y. Furthermore, historical cattle trails were deemed to have established right-of-way status, meaning Garrett's access to the eastern pastures must be restored. It was a comprehensive victory, one that caused celebrations not just at the Lazy Y but throughout Kuster. Benjamin Caldwell, his reputation in tatters and his financial position weakened by the costly legal battle, announced his intention to sell the Circle C and return east, news that was met with poorly disguised relief by most of the community. With the threat to the ranch resolved, Beatrice and Garrett set their wedding date for early May, when the prairie would be in bloom with wildflowers. The ceremony would take place in Custer's small church, with a celebration afterward at the Lazy Y for the entire town. As the day approached, Beatrice found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. The wrong address that had turned out to be exactly right. The man who had opened his home and his heart to her. The community that had embraced her as one of their own. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the Montana sky an endless blue canopy above the newly green landscape. In her room at the boarding house, Beatrice prepared with the help of Mrs. Jenkins and several women from town who had become dear friends over the months. Her dress was simple but elegant ivory silk with delicate lace trim, ordered from a shop in Helena. Her dark hair was arranged with sprigs of white wildflowers, and around her neck she wore a pendant that had belonged to her mother, the one piece of jewelry she had kept when her father's debts forced the sale of most family possessions. When it was time, Edwin Porter arrived to escort her to the church, having offered to stand in for her absent father. "You look beautiful, Miss Ashford," he said, offering his arm. "Garrett Young is a fortunate man indeed." "I'm the fortunate one," Beatrice replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. The church was filled to capacity, with every resident of Kuster and surrounding ranches in attendance. As Beatrice walked down the aisle on Edwin's arm, her eyes found Garrett waiting for her at the altar, his expression one of such profound love and happiness that it brought tears to her eyes. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the pastor speaking of love, partnership, and building a life together on foundations of mutual respect and shared purpose. When it came time to exchange vows, Beatrice and Garrett spoke the traditional words with voices clear and confident, their hands joined, their eyes never leaving each other's faces. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor declared. "You may kiss your bride." The kiss they shared was tender yet profound, a sealing of promises made and a pledge of those yet to come. As they turned to face the congregation, now as Mr. and Mrs. Garrett Young, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration at the Lazy Y lasted well into the evening. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food contributed by every household in the community. Music from fiddles and guitars filled the air as people danced, ate, and toasted the new couple's happiness. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Beatrice found a moment alone with her new husband away from the festivities. "Happy?" Garrett asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He kissed her temple. "You know, when you showed up that day looking for the Harrington place, I never imagined we'd end up here. Didn't you tell me I was meant to find you instead?" Beatrice reminded him with a smile. I did, he acknowledged. But I didn't really believe it then. It was just something to say, a way to ease your disappointment. And now, Garrett turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Now I believe in fate, in providence, in whatever force brought you to my door instead of the Harringtons. Because finding you, Beatrice, has been the greatest blessing of my life. Epilogue. 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on the Lazy Y Ranch, now expanded and thriving under the careful management of Garrett Young and the strategic guidance of his wife. The main house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, 4-year-old James, 2-year-old Emily, and another child expected in the fall. Beatrice still taught at the Kuster school, now housed in a proper schoolhouse built 3 years earlier. She had implemented a curriculum that combined practical knowledge needed for frontier life with the broader education she believed every child deserved, regardless of their circumstances. Her methods had drawn attention throughout the territory, with other communities sending representatives to observe her classroom. Garrett had diversified the ranch operations, adding sheep as he had once considered and establishing a small orchard that was beginning to produce. The water dispute with Caldwell had led to improvements in irrigation systems that made the land more productive than ever before. Benjamin Caldwell had indeed sold his holdings and returned east, his grand plans for dominating the region thwarted by the combined efforts of Beatrice, Garrett, and the Kuster community. The Circle C had been purchased by a family from Oregon who had proven to be excellent neighbors and friends. On this particular day, a letter had arrived from Beatrice's brother in Boston, the same brother whose recommendation of the Harrington position had inadvertently changed the course of her life. He wrote that he and his wife planned to visit Montana in the autumn, curious to see the place that had so captivated his formerly city-dwelling sister. Will they be shocked, do you think? Beatrice asked Garrett as they sat on the porch after supper, watching their children play in the yard. To see how completely I've embraced this life. Garrett considered the question, his hand resting comfortably on her expanding belly where their third child grew. Maybe at first, but then they'll see how happy you are, how right this place is for you, and they'll understand. Beatrice nodded, leaning against his shoulder. I can't imagine being anywhere else now, or with anyone else. Neither can I, Garrett agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Remember when I told you this land gets under your skin, makes it hard to imagine living anywhere else? I remember. Well, that's still true. But it's you, Beatrice, you're what makes this place home. You and the children and the life we've built together. Beatrice smiled, watching as James helped his little sister pick wildflowers in the yard. The same wildflowers that had dotted the landscape the day she had arrived, lost and uncertain, at the gate of the Lazy Y. I arrived at the wrong address, she murmured, echoing the words that had become a cherished part of their shared story. And found exactly where you belonged, Garrett finished, drawing her closer as the Montana sunset painted the sky in splendid hues of gold and crimson, promising another beautiful day to come.